Hello and welcome to a new edition of LOL by the Numbers. Today I want to look at how to recognize a team's strengths and weaknesses, not as a whole, but within a best of series. Being able to quickly recognize these points is essential in not only comebacks, but also in controlling a series from game one. To do so, we'll be looking at TSM vs Gigabyte Marines from the play-in stage of MSI 2017. Primarily, we'll be looking at games 1 and 2, and we'll briefly look at pick and ban strategies as well as some key moments in the game as we talk about the flow of the matches while building a game plan based upon how this specific best of plays out. There's plenty of scouting and research that goes into preparing for any match, let alone a best of series, but what we want to look at is reading the match from game one on, not necessarily the prep work done beforehand. So let's jump right into picks and bans. From the first game, we should take away 2 points from TSM's perspective. One, bans are focused against Levi for the early game jungle, as well as preventing Kennen from being a huge bully in the top lane. These bans should immediately indicate that TSM are looking to play a standard match focused on group team play rather than split push play that wants to dodge early game aggression and move into mid game play for their win condition. This is reinforced by their first picks, a heavy farming jungler in Graves, Ashe who scales well and allows for team engages and picks, and Rebel who we all know is a heavy team fight champion. From this, we can understand TSM's attempted game plan. The second point to take away is the Ziggs red flag. Ziggs isn't broken by any means, but to the support staff, the pick should signal a few things. Gigabyte Marines want to create a non-interactive bot lane. Their goal is to outpush farm and all around ignore TSM's duo lane. The signal that should flash here is the power curve difference between Ziggs Karma and Ashe Zyra. While Ashe Zyra level 6 is extremely strong and potentially deadly, Gigabyte Marines have no reason to be in a position to worry about this. Their long range farmers have plenty of wave clear and all around can just stay safe and keep TSM's dual lane off their turret without putting themselves in danger. As the game progresses, Ziggs will spike harder in the mid game, providing much more damage than Ashe will. Not only does he have higher damage spikes off of 1 and 2 items, this is further compounded by the fact that Ashe will have difficulty providing DPS uptime against Syndra and Gragas, whereas Ziggs will be able to freely spam spells, not only because of his large range, but because TSM are lacking any kind of real backline threat. The last flag that should be raised by Ziggs, and one of the biggest, is simply comfort. Playing against Ziggs is rare for TSM, and so their comfort level against the champion is going to be low. Be it in lane, out of lane, or in macro decisions, they're going to have a hard time if they're even, and especially if they're behind. This doesn't mean an immediate plan to ban Ziggs next game, but that he needs to be carefully watched by the support team during game 1, and for them to come up with a good plan on how to deal with him moving forward if he becomes an issue. With these 2 points, one can conclude that TSM need to play calmly. Ziggs will throw a wrench into their bot lane laning phase and into their mid game, but if they play the lanes well and earn small advantages, they can move into group play without falling behind the power curve of tank versus no tank and Ziggs versus Ashe, as well as allowing them to control the pace of the game rather than being dictated by Gigabyte's Marines pushes and the speed of Ziggs. But if you watch the game, you will know this is not what happened. Let's take a look at a few key points. The first issue for TSM is how they play out the level 1 invade. The invade itself is fine, they have the position advantage and arguably the better level 1. However, instead of warding the bush next to Raptors and pushing Gigabyte Marines out of the jungle, TSM just start the Raptors right away. This ends up creating a 50-50 smite situation that Gigabyte Marines profit from, with Levi getting level 2 and the jump onto Sven's Scarron. TSM should be playing a controlled and slow game, taking small advantages over the course of the match, but right off the start they go for a risky snowball potential move and play it wrong, setting Gigabyte Marines ahead right from the get-go. This is further compounded a few seconds later by Hanser being forced back at level 1 and having to use his TP to get to lane. The other game continues to go in Gigabyte Marines' favors, but let's jump ahead to 10:30 and look at how the lanes have been progressing. The main thing to look at here is the CS numbers. Despite being behind 4 kills and having a major difference in pressure from the junglers, TSM's top 3, the top, jungle, and mid, are keeping up or even surpassing their counterparts. This is huge. It shows that even when significantly behind from the very get-go, they are not losing out in lane to the counterparts in terms of CS. Watching the game, we can also see that they are not losing the lane in terms of pressure either, at times even controlling the lane, specifically from mid lane with the pressure that Bjergsen is able to pour on. This shows a major strength for TSM in Game 1 and expresses the potential difference in skill between the players. The other takeaway comes from the bottom lane. Neither duo has really been pressured. Turrets are near full health, CS is close to even, and the difference is mainly coming from Wild Turtle's death in lane, which showed an unfamiliarity with the Ziggs ability to pick him with Satchel Charge as well as the burst from him in Karma. In a way, this is a strength that TSM should recognize. In an uncomfortable and unfamiliar matchup, Wild Turtle and Biofrost are not falling significantly behind. They're doing well on an island in a bad matchup. As we progress, TSM are still able to make plays from behind, getting a couple kills, including a solo kill in mid lane during a 2v1. Around 1330, we also see a very scrappy, messy fight in which Gigabyte Marines overextend, but in doing so draw TSM into a messy fight, during which we see even more outplay potential from Bjerg. Jumping ahead to 1730, just before TSM's mid turret falls down, we can see that the early gold lead from Gigabyte Marines has actually decreased. All of TSM's lanes have stayed relatively even to their counterparts, and though the game is about to break open, recognizing this in the moment provides great insight moving forward. In a potentially significant way, all of TSM's lanes are outperforming Gigabyte's Marines, keeping up from behind and even preventing a major snowball. It's at this point though that the game is out of TSM's control. Gigabyte Marines' power spikes are hitting, and the lack of a front line from TSM allows Gigabyte's Marines to control the flow of team fights. It's a slower end than better teams will be able to create, and there are mistakes that Gigabyte Marines make that show more small mechanical errors that TSM can take away. However, as far as improving the game plan going forward, this is a good place to stop. From here on out, TSM should lose. So from this game, we can take away several strengths and a few weaknesses, building a plan into the rest of the series. Our first takeaway, TSM is playing better in lanes, particularly Haunter and Bjerg. Knowing this, slowing down the game and focusing on having a strong top 3, which is once again the top, middle, and jungle, is a major strength for TSM. Building small advantages over time will be huge if they can just control themselves and not have a need to force plays. A second takeaway, Sven, despite several deaths, is keeping up in the jungle. However, his lane presence is very small. This indicates a difference in jungle style. Levy is doing better, being more impactful, but Sven is playing a little smarter in his ability to keep up and farm and knowing where to path for counter jungling. Knowing this, TSM can play to put Sven on a strong, control-oriented jungler. Graves, Lee, and Ivern come to mind as they're very good at farming, very good at trying to watch the opponent. They're not going to carry the games, but that's not Sven's strength here. Levi is definitely the better carry jungle, but Sven is able to keep up with him and should be put on a plan to support his lanes rather than be the winning condition. It's likely that Sven can build a lead this way over time through his jungle pathing and do his best to be preventing Levi's impact by trailing him. Third point, Haunter stays even in a somewhat skill-oriented advantage, and this is despite jungler focus. Knowing this, getting Haunter into a skill matchup is likely going to be best moving forward, allowing him to outplay Stark. 4. Haunter and Bjerg are doing extremely well despite their advantages from level 1. This is a signal to TSM to put a focus on them and prioritize the top and mid side of the map. Wild Turtle and Bio stay even despite an uncomfortable lane. However, they do remain ineffective. This has two quick takeaways. The first is to remove Ziggs from the equation. It turns bot lane into a non-interactive lane, and if Wild Turtle and Bio are able to play well in this type of situation, they should be able to do even better when in more comfortable standard matchups. The second takeaway here is that Wild Turtle and Biofrost don't need any focus and will be perfectly fine if they're left on an island. As TSM's top three are going to have a bigger impact against Gigabyte Marines based on Game 1, their duo should be given a self contained lane and mostly left to their own devices. On to Game 2. Starting right from picks and bans, we can see that TSM hasn't really recognized their strengths and weaknesses from the first game, and oddly enough, end up creating a worse draft than last match. Let's go ahead and hop right into it. From the start, TSM's choice of bans are awkward. Cannon is fine, but they've seen that Levi can play Kha'Zix to great success. Banning Graves is essentially ineffective. The Rumble ban is also suspect, considering that Haunter was doing well in lane last match. He should be able to beat Stark no matter what he picks. Not banning Ziggs is a red flag again as well. TSM's mindset is mismatched from how the last game played out, in that they believe the problem was not having a tank and want to force that matchup top. I think these bans are bad personally and don't play anything to what they should have learned from last match. Moving into the picks, TSM picking Ashe, knowing Gigabyte Marines are likely to run Karma Ziggs again after the first pick Karma, is regretful. It shows a lack of understanding about the lane matchup as well as how it pushes compositions. Especially when looking to force a tank versus tank matchup and picking up Lee Sin, there's a massive potential for hampering your team's DPS moving forward, which is what TSM end up doing. Letting Gragas go over to Gigabyte Marines as well is suspect. We want Haunter to be able to have a skillful matchup, but picking Nautilus really puts him into somewhat of a skillless top lane while being on the less technical side of the Gragas versus Nautilus match. The last round of the draft is also awkward in that TSM bother banning Fizz while leaving up Echo. If you're going to pick Syndra, you need to ban both counters rather than just a single one, and we already know what the top lane is going to be. This was a great spot for a ban on Ziggs, and have the team believe that Muir could win the lane against Fizz. But TSM think they could do fine if Ziggs is picked once again. At this point in the draft, though, TSM are almost dead in the water. Once Gigabyte Marines nab Ziggs, they have only Snowball as their win condition, talking about TSM. And last picking Braum just makes that all the more difficult. Not only are TSM fighting with low sustained DPS, they cede bot lane to Gigabyte Marines with the Braum pick, further pushing them back in terms of power curves. And we will see this come to bite them in the butt this match. All in all, TSM's draft doesn't play to their strengths from the previous game, instead playing down their own strengths while Gigabyte Marines stay the same. We'll jump straight into the 10-minute mark this time, and for those of you who haven't watched the match, the game's a bit messy, but does favor TSM from the start. They respond well to Gigabyte's early game aggression and do pull out a lead. Once again, at 10 minutes, we can see the top three of TSM are staying even or outperforming Gigabyte Marines in a chaotic game. This time, Haunter has been building a lead, and Bjerg is winning lane and providing more control than Optimus. TSM's duo lane is also staying strong in lane despite another death. In an even worse matchup, they are staying even and their turret is still strong. What we can see at this point is the same strengths as game 1, but in a stronger fashion. Looking a little bit forward to the second dragon fight, we can see that TSM are significantly ahead in terms of gold, but here is where things start to go sour. We will see the compositional errors that TSM made shine through in this fight. TSM's composition is good at the start of the fight, though Optimus gets a good flank. TSM are unable to come out ahead in a fight, getting a 2-for-1. It's at this point that TSM should just back off. They have used their burst damage and need to recognize how low their sustained damage is. Instead, TSM try to fight and give up 3 kills for 0. TSM did not recognize the difference in sustained damage and fail in what is essentially Syndra versus 3. After this, we once again see that TSM are unfamiliar with Ziggs, moving to push bottom while leaving him alone top, ending in a terrible trade that pulls Gigabyte Marines back to even gold and in control of the match, with better split push and better team. This exactly same situation occurs again at the third dragon, in which TSM start the dragon and lose the fight even worse, having no sustained damage, especially with Wild Turtle pushed out by Zed. This is all we really need to look at from game two. It shows a very big weakness in the draft. And the big thing is that we also see the same strengths early game as game one. For TSM, there should be three big takeaways from this game. The same strengths that can be taken from game one still apply. Two, rushing plays, forcing objectives, and all around not taking the time to control the fights and the setup of fights are playing right into Gigabyte Marine's style. Particularly, the Dragon fights are showing TSM's lack of respect or understanding of Gigabyte Marine's composition against their own. They need to slow down and play the game we know TSM is capable of. With their strengths once again showing the same as Game 1, TSM should be playing the game of 1,000 paper cuts, turning small advantages in lane into a substantial team advantage. Third point, take out Ziggs. This is the second time he's prevented TSM's dual lane from being a factor in lane, as well as providing significantly better presence in team fights. This game also shows how he twists the macro element of a match and can punish a team if they are unfamiliar with his ability to push. Moving on to Game 3, the plan for TSM should be the same as after Game 1. These points have only been reinforced by the second match and must be recognized at this point, as we are in the do or die situation. So let's look at the draft. This draft is perfect. Everything about this draft from TSM is done right and plays 100% to their strengths against Gigabyte Marines and stops their weaknesses that have been shown. First off, Ziggs is banned, and jungle bans have been dropped, recognizing that they can't stop Levi and need to let bot lane be able to play the game. Snagging Karma E early gives TSM a great starting point for bot lane, as well as denying a huge amount of power from Gigabyte Marines. Taking Gragas before Gigabyte Marines is also huge and gives Hanser a nearly guaranteed skill-based lane in which he can show his prowess. Also, not picking early game Ashe allows TSM to have more flexibility in understanding the compositions and providing solid DPS uptime for Wild Turtle. Moving into the second phase, TSM pick up a strong mid laner from Yerg that he can dominate with, and Wild Turtle is put onto a self-sufficient ADC. This draft works so well in TSM's strengths, and it's what we should have seen from Game 2 at the start. As for the game itself, there's not much to say about it. TSM wins lane and stomps the game. This is what you see from a better team when they get a controlled early lead. The game doesn't drag on, there aren't many opportunities for the other team to come back, and it just ends up in a giant snowball. With a skilled matchup for Hanser, we see him shine, absolutely dominating Stark. Yerg again controls mid lane for the third time, and TSM's duo, now in a lane that actually interacts with each other, are able to show that they're just fine being left alone and can even pull advantages in the lane. Great job. The takeaway is easy. Do it again. Moving into Game 4, though, TSM falter. Their great gameplay and plan from Game 3 seems to have been forgotten, and they fall away from their strengths in this series. Let's take a look at the draft once again. TSM's first round is solid. They stay with the same bans and take the Karma. I'd almost like to see a Gragas ban instead of LeBlanc, but Gigabyte Marine gave it up last game, and keeping LeBlanc from Optimus is fine. The Nautilus pick is okay. It puts the lane back to neutral, in which Hanser should get a small lead, but will be unable to really showcase dominance in lane. It's not the best start, but it's okay. The issues start to show in the second round, though. We get double ADC bans from Gigabyte Marines, but it still leaves up options for TSM's duos to have a self-contained lane. Caitlyn and Lucian are both solid picks here, allowing them to show laning skill, staying even or ahead of Gigabyte Marines' duo lane. The biggest problem I feel comes with picking Orianna. TSM are putting a lot of their eggs into Wild Turtle, and so far in this series, the bot lane has not been TSM's strongest point. With the Orianna pick, TSM's duo can no longer just do well slash better, and must move into TSM's team fights as a solid point. They have to dominate and have to turn into the linchpin for TSM. By no means, however, does this mean that TSM are at a disadvantage. When playing control, they're still showing up as the better players. It just means that they haven't given themselves the highest chance possible from the very start of the match. Right off the bat, though, we see that TSM is not playing with control. Their duo lane go for an all-in at level 1 against a duo that has sustain. The all-in fails, and Wild Turtle is forced back, losing any control they should have had in the matchup. Another mistake happens mid lane when Bjergsen doesn't respect the level 6 from Fizz, even when knowing that he will have the EXP advantage from both TP and the current lane push. More early game overzealousness puts TSM behind. But just as in previous games, if we look at the 10-minute mark, we can see all lanes on TSM are staying even or ahead in CS despite deaths and greedy plays in lane. Again, around the 20-minute mark, we can see TSM gaining on Gigabyte Marine's gold lead, pulling ahead in CS and getting a few kills of their own. There are still mistakes, like Hanser trying to defend the top tier 2 turret, but overall there's a slow gain for TSM. Shortly after, though, at the next dragon, TSM almost lose the game. Though they are climbing back and going to scale well with Caitlyn, Wild Turtle's flank, if you can call it that, at Dragon is just a huge mistake. This should signal a big lead for Gigabyte Marines as they threaten Baron and get more kills, and then the inhibitor. But luckily for TSM, they throw here as well, trying to end the game, but instead handing TSM the Baron and the win. There is something we can heavily take away from this game that shows its head more than previous matches. We can still pull from this game that TSM are better off focusing the top 3 and leaving their duo to play well on their own. The big new thing, or rather confirmation, is about TSM's weakness against Gigabyte Marines. TSM need to stop trying to make plays. There feels like there's this deep-seated need to show off, to stomp Gigabyte Marines, to almost prove to themselves and to others that they are good players rather than knowing that they are and playing the solid game we know TSM is capable of. They take risky plays, force fights, try to be the hero, and it's not working out. Perhaps pressure is hitting TSM hard. It's been their main weakness the whole series, but here more than any other game it shines through. As we move into Game 5, we can take away the same things we've been taking away the whole series for TSM. Focus top mid, give a solid control jungle that's going to support them, allow Wild Turtle and Biofrost to be left alone on an island in a lane that they are going to be able to do well in. TSM need to make sure that they're playing slow and controlled, as they are winning the game in lanes every single time. They don't need to make the flashy plays. They don't need to snowball this massive lead. They just need to play controlled, earn a gold lead, and move into the middle game in team play. Finally, we move into Game 5. TSM need to calm down, play their own control game, and not fall to the pressure. Look to the sets of Game 3 and recognize where their strengths and weaknesses are in this series. TSM start the draft on a great foot, once again staying with the bans slash first pick strategy. This time around, though, they pick Bjergsen into a strong spot from the start, giving him the ability to outperform Optimus. Ivern is a great choice for TSM, allowing Sven to focus even more on supporting Hanser, Bjergsen, and tracking Levi. I really like focusing on getting Bjergsen Syndra in the first round and allowing Hanser to just pick later. His pool is big enough that he's not going to be banned out, and having him be able to get onto a skilled matchup is going to be great for TSM. The second round bans from Gigabyte Marines are strange, knocking out Lucian Caitlyn and not Ezreal. Either way, TSM take Ezreal, Kate, or Lucian here. The pickup of Renekton is huge for TSM. It puts Hanser into a skill-based matchup in the top lane, allowing him to potentially dominate the match. Another draft that plays into the strengths TSM have been showing in this series. At this point, the support staff's job is done. There's no more to do. And though it took a while to get there, we have our second strong draft from TSM that plays into their strengths in this series. It's up to the players to stay away from their weaknesses that the support staff should be pointing out during the breaks and making sure that they stay in controlled play. We won't look much at Game 5 for this video, as we wanted to look at recognizing working with the strengths and weaknesses within a series. There's much of the same in this game as the last few. Gigabyte Marines showing their aggression, TSM trying a little too hard, but we get to see Haunter in a matchup he can take over, and take over he does, nearly putting the entire team on his back and getting so far ahead that Gigabyte's Marines have no answer for him. So that's it for recognizing strengths and weaknesses for my first new edition of LOL by the Numbers. I hope you learned something from it, a little bit on how to look and where to look for a team's strengths within a series against a specific team. There's so much here to study, and trying to get this down to a short amount was a little bit hard. 5 games is a lot to cover, but I hope you enjoyed it. So once again, this is LOL by the Numbers, and I hope to see you next time. Hey all, I had wanted to do this video early, but being late, we get a little bit of a bonus. We get to see the rematch of TSM vs Gigabyte's Marines in the second group stage. TSM have had a week to study this series, recognize their strengths and weaknesses against Gigabyte Marines, and come up with a strong, solid plan for their first game in the group. Sadly, and I hate to be negative, very disappointingly, this was not the case. TSM's game plan and in-game play felt like nobody had studied their series against Gigabyte Marines. TSM came in with a plan, but one that ran entirely counter to their strengths against Gigabyte Marines previously. TSM's draft here is just dreadful. It's like they entirely forgot about their 5-game match with Gigabyte Marines. First off, they banned Syndra as their last ban, which is an awful control ban at this point. TSM should be banning Karma here and prevent one of Gigabyte Marine's strongest champions from their last set, and force Gigabyte Marines to choose between Lulu, Gragas, and Syndra. And this way, TSM can get 2 of those 3 picks, providing a strong start to their draft. Instead, they give away Gragas to Gigabyte Marines, a champion that Haunter can outplay Stark on, and one of Stark's biggest champions themselves, and trade it for Lulu Graves. The first of which is just a trade with Karma, and the second is just another trade against Levi, who picks up the Coggins. There's no gain for TSM here, and they could have got 2 for 1, and instead get nothing. They give away 1. Even in the way they banned, TSM should just take Karma here instead of Lulu, especially if they want the opportunity to flex pick it. Giving Bjergsen something to work with instead of putting him 100% on the back burner. After that, we still get a bad pickup in Nautilus, providing a neutral lane despite how strong Haunter has been against Stark in the previous series. And while Wild Turtle can't get 2 comfortable champions banned from him in the next rotation, this very easily should have been an Ezreal or Caitlyn pickup, and then have Haunter counterpick later. The second phase draft is just as worse, if not more so. Banning Lee Sin is almost pointless, knowing that Levi will go Kha'Zix and do perfectly fine early, mid, and late on him. If TSM wanted to ban jungle, they need to send both bans at Levi and knock down the Kha'Zix as well. Banning LeBlanc is also a head scratcher. If TSM are willing and planning to flex Lulu mid, leave LeBlanc up. It is actually one of the few good matchups for Lulu, both in lane and outside of lane. Twitch next, well, whatever. Wild Turtle is running low on champions, and it's not the worst pick. TSM could run a Twitch composition with Orianna, Lulu, and try to salvage this draft. Hope for a game like Game 4, but with less errors from TSM. Instead, they don't put Lulu bottom. They hamper Bjergsen by having him play Lulu and put nearly 100% of the game onto Twitch, a very vulnerable champion. It's just ugh. I could complain about this draft and composition just by itself, let alone in context of the past series that TSM have had against Gigabyte Marines. In the end, TSM draft a comp that places 0 of their strengths against TSM, completely hampering their highest win conditions and putting their eggs into their weakest possible basket against Gigabyte Marines. Inside of the game is no better, with TSM running a comedy of errors, once again trying to force plays and prove themselves, almost as if once again they need to validate themselves to others. Well, that's actually it this time. The bonus is done. I hope to see all of you around next time. Please leave comments below. Let me know what you thought. Any suggestions, be it on the content or even on the video or my voice. I'm editing everything alone and I'm learning. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.